Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven, and we're going to take a look into 2019, starting with the Destiny event, Covenant Masters, that's coming up for us, and how that turned a little casual, as well as Christian Peterson's retirement and what that might mean for your favorite games. Stay tuned. All right, here we are. Well, welcome back, everyone. It has been a bit of a break here, a little vacation since we've been on the air.
It's always a little weird when you do something very regularly, like, I don't know, every week, and then you just don't do it for a month. And then the weirdest thing to me is coming back to it, like the podcast, because we haven't done it in like a month.
Do you remember how to do it?
Because it feels familiar, but it feels off. Like something weird's going on when really it's probably just that you haven't done it.
Just got to get back in the swing. You know, I've been kind of checked out of the tabletop gaming sphere in favor of personal pursuits such as camping and snowboarding.
I'm a bit jealous about the second one of those.
Yeah,
things.
so I'm trying to get kind of back in the swing and see what 2019 may well bring for us. Can I make a prediction right off the top? First podcast of 2019. Here's what I think. I think that if I were a game publisher right now, whether I'm going to Kickstarter or going direct to retailers or to distribution, whatever it is, I think the thing that needs to be explored most and probably the biggest opportunity in 2019 is market the cooperative game and the solo game. We've seen, I think Arkham is a great example of what happens if you really were to understand kind of the solo community behind a game like Arkham and Lord of the Rings, these expandable LCGs that can be cooperative and can be played solo. Huge. I think it's massive. And then we also have what I would call kind of a burgeoning sense that being able to bust out a game and play it by yourself at your house is not to take away from the ability to then play that game in a group. It's just the ability to, let's say I've got 30 minutes on a Friday night or something. I could turn on a YouTube video, I could turn on this podcast, I could run through like a solo Arkham scenario or something, have a great time, and still feel a part of the community that I can participate with online. So I think if I were a publisher, I would say, all right, let's forget and kind of get away from, again, that kind of established paradigm and look at what can I do, particularly with like solo variants of my games to give them more legs. And I feel like publishers are taking note of that, especially in the past year or so.
How much this is kind of random, it's not really random, it's related to that point exactly, but how much do you think the games that aren't necessarily built with a solitaire mode or cooperative version, right? So solitaire is playing by yourself, I'm thinking about card games and miniature games, right? So like hobby miniature games, you have the hobby element, which is putting models together, painting, that whole thing, which you can do by yourself.
Right.
And even with collectible card games or with deck building games, the deck building process takes up a lot of time. And it's something you do on your own usually a lot, right? Which is like you can build decks, whether literally with cards or on some app or website. But I think what we're also seeing, though, is like I think about Keyforge, where they just kind of cut all that out.
Yeah, that's interesting. There wasn't a real solo time involved in Keyforge, right? I think about painting and priming miniatures and even deck building. I think for no small percentage of players, maybe a majority, that might be most of the time invested in those games.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
And that might be part of why they can be successful. Mm-hmm. Particularly the hobby miniature game, right? Where it's like 90% of your time you can spend at home doing this with no other people required. But then it does give you a window into those shared moments where you come to a store, you go to an event, or you go to someone's house and you play that game together. And you can listen to a podcast and be in a community and whatnot. But they do have solo elements. It's just not as on the nose as actually. And I think that's thing.
That's pretty interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
It's pretty. That brought that up in my brain. But then I'm thinking like, the flip side of that is, would I rather still, actually, even if I could play a solo variant, just play Destiny or build decks and do the deck building process? And it can be fun and rewarding to like tweak a deck and whatnot. But at the same time, like. It can bog you just completely down.
I'm just thinking like a game like God Tier that's kind of slated for this year, one of the ones that we're watching. If I could pick my three unit team or 3 champion team, and then even if just like once a month, they've been talking about campaign play and we have no idea what that's going to look like. But if there is a campaign variant that is, you're working through this kind of series of 3 or 4 or 5 missions with various objectives, like you have to do this in 3 or 4 turns, and it tells you how to set the board up, just like Arkham does.
Yeah.
That would give a game like God Tier or any miniatures games tremendous legs, I think. Like I would even collect those models and maybe never play with another person again. So like from a publisher's perspective, you can't deny the power of having a product that's viable in a solo situation. And so yeah, you should look at it. What do you think 2019? Do you see any trends, anything that needs to happen? It feels like a pulling back from the kind of big expansionary period of expandable games, particularly, and board games, which has been nuts the past 5 to 10 years. And is this now a going under the surface and straightening out things and getting things sustainable for the next big push?
Well, I mean, I think there's a natural cadence to the industry, right? Which hovers, to me, around Gen Con and Essen, which happened in the later half of the year, right? Where a lot of times this phase we're in right now is all the stuff has come out, the holidays have happened, and then now it's basically build and sustain your communities throughout the year, and then that'll lead us eventually to Gen Con and Essen, where board game companies and publishers of expandable games are looking to put new stuff out. And whether that's variants or new additions to big changes to their current line, or adding things, right? I mean, that's always when you see at least the big games we've seen in the past couple of years. Last year in particular, right, I think you saw kind of the end of the curve after Destiny, because to me, Destiny represented the first really successful collectible game in a while, like new collectible game that was just like big. Everyone's talking about it, everyone's buying it.
What's interesting about that, and this is something that our own perspective is kind of, it's narrowed, it's a little bit removed from, I think, the greater expandable field, because there's a number of games that I didn't know anything about, right? You've got these games that are just kind of floating on the top that haven't, and Destiny may be in this space as well, but games like Final Fantasy, and there's a lot of like kind of those anime-based.
Well, there's Final Fantasy, the Dragon Ball Super.
Yeah, the Dragon Ball Super thing happened.
But those all came after Destiny, right? So
I guess that's true.
I would be curious to look, but from my perspective, it seemed like I hadn't seen a successful, and that's the trick, right? Even Final Fantasy and Dragon Ball Super, which I think have a certain amount of success. I see them and I see people playing them and they keep going, so I assume they're being successful. But like Destiny was the first one that like hit. Like it was, people still kept, I think over the past 10 years, collectible games have kind of kept slowly happening.
Yeah.
But outside the main games that have been around forever, the Pokemon, the Yu-Gi-Oh, the Magic, Destiny was the first big one to like hit in a while. And so then you had this kind of like cascade of games coming out, right? Lightseekers was among them as well. Like that was a pretty early one that happened. Warhammer Champions, but then last year we got Transformers and Champions, and I'm trying to think of the others. Final Fantasy was last year. The year before that was Dragon Ball. And there's plenty more to go around. But I almost feel like that, again, one of the problems with collectible games is they're very exhaustive. So like to get into that, it costs a lot of time and money. And so a lot of times players can't play a ton of collectible games. And there's only so many people playing collectible games in the world. And there's big games in the mix, right? Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, all the games we've been talking about. And so the market, the industry, the number of people playing these games can only support so many collectible games. And I feel like in 2019, I would be surprised if we got more collectible games. I would definitely be surprised if we got more successful collectible games.
Do you think it's a trimming? I mean, do you think a number of those games that have kind of been getting through get chopped ultimately? Is it possible that you have, the Pantheon, the Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon? Can anything join those? Are the 2019 moves going in that direction? Or is it a lot of kind of trimming and falling off and then maybe trying some new ones in a year or two?
Well, I think this is the year where they either stick around or go away. It is kind of a proving year. And we talked about this you weren't on this cast, the Can Destiny Beat Magic? Robert and I did that podcast. And, I think the one thing Robert said that kind of stuck with me since then is that, for a game to join that pantheon of those games, those big, giant games that seem to just perennially be around, it's less going, like, it's not probably it's not going to be some giant spike in demand where there's just this huge player base created, because a lot of times these companies aren't in a position to actually sustain that, right?
Yeah.
But
or even capitalize on it.
Yeah,
They
it's
don't
like
have the products around. Right?
100. That's what I'm saying. It's like they can't handle. Any company right now walks in, even if they had the demand that Magic has, it probably couldn't.
No.
Do
Like
it.
if Champion suddenly was as popular as
Yeah.
Magic, it would be
So,
unsustainable.
the normal product life cycle, you kind of have a spike early on when a game comes out and it's exciting. Destiny saw this, Champion saw this, Transformers saw this. You couldn't get product, like all these games, right? Everyone wants to try it. It's hard to find. So when you do find it, you buy a whole bunch of it. And then, people start playing and it either sticks or it doesn't. And so you naturally kind of have a bleed off of the players that maybe this isn't the game for them or something else is more interesting or whatever. But games that will stick around, right, they will go down and they'll kind of plateau. And then the real question is, once they plateau, can they find a way to keep people around and keep adding people at a sustainable rate? And so I think for a game to join that pantheon, it'll look a lot more like it was for Magic and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is they didn't get where they're at now in a year or two.
Yeah, day one, right?
This is a 5, 10, 20-year pursuit, and you essentially have to stay in the game for that long and slowly build it, right? I think it is a slow build, and I think the other thing that all these games have going for them is I think this industry in 2019 and beyond is going to keep growing. I think even the the multiplayer cooperative thing you were talking about, the thing that is hitting at is that it is making it where there's less barriers of entry for these games and to be a part of these communities. Because if you have to have, I think about 40K, they did some great work over the past couple of years. With their, I forget what the skirmish version of it's called.
Yeah, I know. I had it literally in my head probably 5 minutes ago.
Oh, man. Anyways.
And they got these battle boxes, I think, is what they're doing now, too.
So, but the reality is that, if you have to have $1,500 in miniatures and $1,500 in terrain and a 8x4 board to partake in this hobby, that's going to keep a lot of people out. And so...
Not just a lot of people.
Most people. Most humans on the planet. But the reality is that a lot of companies in the industry are starting to figure this out. I think Keyforge is a tremendous sign of this, which is they created a card game that removed about as many barriers of entry as you can possibly remove.
Yeah.
Cost, deck building, time of deck building, following a meta, and they made it where a ton of people could play this game. And so the more that keeps happening, I think the bigger the industry gets. The bigger the industry gets, I think that every pocket of that industry is going to sustain more players, even collectible games, right? Which to me is collectible games and miniature war games on the big scale are the most exhaustive, intensive games in the space. And it's really funny that they're some of the oldest.
Yeah.
So you had Warhammer around in the 70s, right? And you had Magic starting in the early 90s, and they kind of built the industry.
And because the amazing thing is, and this kind of gets, I think it gets back to your point a little bit, is like a game like 40K or let's say Warhammer, because it did all start in that old school kind of out of Dungeons and Dragons fantasy setting. It didn't intend, they didn't come at this as how do we create a universally market viable product. It came out of a couple of people saying we'd love to emulate these battles using a set of rules. And so things kind of moved from that space and became what we're now seeing, but it's only now. Yeah. I think that the question is starting to be more about how can we become market viable to a larger segment of the population without losing the heart and soul of what makes this so enjoyable for the people who love it. Now, some companies are going to miss that mark and go too mainstream.
Sure.
And that's something that we discuss a lot about how far can the industry swing and in what directions without losing what makes it so enjoyable, because you don't want to alienate the people who are already here, right? Sure. I think all companies, all publishers struggle with this balance. I even saw, so Godshare is a great example, following just a little bit of the kind of Kickstarter, post-Kickstarter things that's going on. Had a model, I think it was Grimshala, who was essentially a giant kind of blob-like female form with some, scandalous, questionable, kind of grotesque features going on. And that model got changed to now a male version, presumably because it was kind of a topless model. And the sculpt is, to be fair, quite a bit less exciting. It's just more blobular and kind of weird. But there was a large amount of outcry about that because like this was my favorite model. This was why I backed the Kickstarter. This is what I wanted to play. So they made that change from what they've said to be a more mainstream appeal game because you don't want to have that kind of thing on the shelf that's keeping mom and dad away from buying that for their kid.
Yeah.
But in the process, they alienated some of their core fan base. And so you have that slider, I feel like, that is always going to create pressure. And this happens in every industry, right? Whether it's, launch of the iPhone, and is this too far? Like, can people go from a normal, like, flip phone to this icon-based?
Yes, they can.
And the question was, it became yes. But I think there's other examples that I can't immediately, think of where
because usually those fail.
Yeah, it can move
so
too
we don't
fast.
talk about them anymore.
And it's
right?
like, oh, this was too far into the mainstream, and you missed kind of why people wanted to do this in the first place.
Well, with the iPhone example, there were touchscreens before the iPhone, right? But again, it was finding the balance between the familiar and the new that made it approachable for the new people, and also something that everyone that was already on the train wanted to use.
So it sounds like you're saying more that 2019 is taking these pockets that have since been expanded in terms of potential and driving into the kind of market viability, sustainability pieces of those to see if you can get either those plateaus higher or starting to actually grow.
Sure.
Like, is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think it's a proving year for a lot of games and a lot of companies who are making those games. And I think the most potential, like the energy that I sense, is in the technological realm. I think Champions was a bearer of this early on. And there's a lot of stuff that they're struggling with right now that has nothing to do with the technological component.
Yeah, exactly. It's looking questionable for sure.
Obviously, like them making it where you can play that game on a phone meant that immediately you can play solo. There's not a new variant of the game invented. You can just literally play against the AI or against anyone on the planet at any point in time. And I think that's so helpful for people learning the game, for putting their toe in the water without having to show up at a physical space, without having to buy anything yet. They can just play, right? I mean, there's a lot of benefits there. And so I have to think that more and more companies are going to figure out how to integrate that and you leverage it in ways that we just haven't even seen yet.
Because that's the other question you have to ask about Champions is, what we're seeing now, which to me is Champions is like in the danger zone as a collectible game. Now, that said, I mean, Lightseekers is one of those games that probably has been there before too. I didn't follow Lightseekers,
sure.
But PlayFusion seems to have a way of just kind of like keeping at it until like, I played Lightseekers for the first time this Gen Con.
Yeah.
And it's been out for a while, but this is the first time I even kind of really seen it or considered it. Maybe Champions, a year from now or 2 years when it hits its stride, and if they got the cash and the funding to do that, then, good for them if they can make that upward turn.
Bridge. But it's also like, it's the advantage they have is they have the app. And so like people can stay in touch and stay playing it for a long time. They may go digital only even, right? But again, the burden of a collectible game is that you have to produce a lot to produce it, which is why you need so many players buying it to make it sustainable to keep producing it. It just takes one set of like printing completely random fake numbers, but it's like 50,000 boxes and only selling 10,000 for that to be a real problem.
Yeah, and that's kind of the question is, yes, the app is good and seemingly helpful for people. Certainly, I played more games of Champions than I ever would have because of that app, 99% more, I would say. But is the fact that you're a single person playing this game on an app what ultimately leads to a game like Champions not being able to make it? Because you don't have the unity of an in-person community to get you through the bad set and make it out to the third.
Sure.
Because like once, let's say a second set comes out, and Champions, a lot of this is speculated, not that exciting for a lot of people, or like not exactly the direction a lot of people enjoyed about the game. You were playing on the app, you put the app down, you start playing Hearthstone again or whatever else you were doing with your time, and maybe you never think to pick up Champions again. Whereas if you're locked into a game store community, you will constantly kind of get that refresh of, yeah, Champions is still here. Oh yeah, maybe I'll play a game or two. Well, I've got a casual deck I can bust out. And then the third set hits and it's like, this looks super exciting, and now you're back, right?
Sure.
So it might be that if you silo people off in the app too much, then they don't have the kind of unifying power of community. And so again, it's one of these sliders that, like you said, it's a good step. It's a good look at what is capable when technology is integrated. But if you're still selling physical product and you need physical people buying those physical products,
That's a different problem.
now maybe we need them more physical, and maybe the app should be less of a thing.
Well, and I thought the prize kits that were late, and again, it's funny. I mean, if you're around long enough, you start seeing these things over and over, right? Where company makes the first set of a game. It's not the first time we've seen it. It sells out.
Time.
It sells out.
Every time.
Which is normal. Like, it's hard to bet big when you haven't sold any.
And everybody likes a brand new game.
Everyone loves a brand new game.
It's full of potential energy.
Well, you have players that will eventually stick around. You also have players that are just trying it out. And so, like, it never tells you the actual, like, what's going to really happen. And then that usually leads to third set was usually designed before the first set even came out. And so you have way less knowledge about the game.
They're usually
and
problematic.
The set 2 and 3 is usually problematic. And then that creates the dip, right? And then the real question is if you pull out of that. Because, like, and I thought it was really clever. Like, the OP kits, that's what I was mentioning at first. Those were also behind the curve. It was like they came late when, like, they didn't hit when it was, like, super hot. But those are really clever. It's like they have an alt art. It's in a pack, and it's got one alt art or, like, full bleed or something promo and a scan card that gets you an in-app thing. And I haven't ever won one, so I don't know what they get you. But it's like that kernel of an idea where, like, because you have this app interface, Keyforge could do the same thing, where, like, you get a cool promo thing, and then, like, there's also a thing you scan into the Keyforge app, and it gets you 5 shards, or it gets you access to this, or it gets you randomly, you get a free seat at Worlds if you want to go, or you get to go to this thing, or who knows what. Or here's a preview card no one else has ever seen. Like, that was your prize. You're the first person to see this card. So it just kind of hints at, like, ways of, again, I'm heavily on the train of, like, digital not replacing, but amplifying and complementing these games. And I don't think anyone has come close to getting it right.
This is about sorting this out. 2019, 2020 maybe is like, I feel like we have the beginnings of interesting things, and now we need the Ubers and the Airbnbs and whatnot to show up, because, like, it's very similar to me of you have a lot of these ideas that are formed by app economies and internet and connectivity on devices, and only now, after many years of random capabilities being thrown at the wall, you actually have it being used in a sustainable way that people are flocking to and actually
well, I think one of the greater challenges, which we hinted at with Champions, is doing it in a way that promotes in-person connection and not replacing it.
Yeah.
Because, like, that was the struggle with Champions, right? It's like, I don't know how many people are playing the app. I don't know what the stats are like now. But, like, if you don't have a sustainable community happening, then, like, what's the point of doing the physical anyway?
Yeah. Why even print cards?
And no one has crossed that yet.
Sure.
And I'm curious to see. But, I mean, I think that's, I'm looking at it, it's like I would never last year have been like, this is the year that, like, someone's going to come and, like, figure out how to get rid of deck building. Right? And so, like, I don't know. Maybe general expectation is there'll be a lot of companies releasing a lot of board games. There'll be a lot of companies trying to get into collectible card games, non-collectible card games, miniature games. They're going to be taking shots. And
Kickstarter seems to be less of a thing these days, too.
It's quieted down quite a bit.
It's interesting. Because the CMON announcement where they basically said from what I could tell, we lost a lot of money because, of the model that we're using, Kickstarter and all that, kind of put a little bit of a perspective on people who were either pro or anti-Kickstarter, like, well, maybe it's not the panacea we thought it was. And then other people saying, this proves that step of the ecosystem is not productive for the industry as a whole, and then you have your dissenters on that side. So I don't know. I think that Kickstarter again is another one of these things that's getting figured out in 2019, 2020, and some companies use it, some won't, and there will be very good reasons for both approaches.
Well, and there's only so many games that you can kickstart for $300 or $400 that come with 8 million models.
For me, that's a zero. Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's probably 1 or 2.
Yeah, 1,
right?
maybe 2. If you can
I've seen the Kingdom Death and there's the Cthulhu game. There was just like boxes and boxes of models showing up.
This is everything that I dislike about. This is why I'm a minimalist, probably in proper terms. Like, my favorite game right now is still Swords and Strongholds. Like, I played that over New Year's.
It's like this big.
I think it's incredible. I told
models.
Chris Kaiser, actually, we were chatting just the other day about chess, because he's gotten back into chess. And I was saying, I wouldn't say it out loud, although I'm about to, but I think Swords and Strongholds may be a better game than chess. For how it hits everything that chess hits for me, with the random variables that take it off of a book-like study mentality to learn the openings and closings.
Well, and I think that one statement is so profound, because especially if someone knew you, right, and you really were into chess and it was a thing for a minute, but the reality of, like, if you actually ask the question, why am I doing this thing, right? And if the answer is to enjoy doing it and enjoy playing this game with someone else, and then you play chess. If we played chess, then we played a game of Swords and Stronghold, and we asked not which is the objectively better designed game, which one's going to determine which of us is better at this game more often than the other.
Yeah.
But instead, which one are we going to enjoy playing right now the most?
Yeah.
You're going to say Swords and Strongholds.
In that genre of, deciding the moves that you want to make and having a board where there's a double objective with everybody having the same resources at hand.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the one that I would rather play.
And I think that is I don't know if this is, I doubt this is the, like, industry-wide answer, but, like, my general, where I'm at as a player of games, right, is, like, I'm asking the question, that exact question first, which is, which one am I going to enjoy more, not which one is objectively a better game. And I think really the work of innovating the actual game itself has been done to death. Like, we've seen that a million times. It's cool if you put a new theme on a worker placement game and it does its own unique fold of thing. That's fine. But, like, that is not where the biggest steps are. That's why we talk about technology. We talk about the way companies are distributing and the way they're producing product. Even Keyforge, right, it is changing things about games that has nothing to do with the game itself. Like, the actual rules and the mechanics of the game, it's changing the things around that.
Yeah.
Because I think we've kind of just figured that out.
We've had game rules and rule sets around for thousands of years, right? So, like, it makes sense that wouldn't necessarily be the most innovative direction to go. But all that to say, like, these Kickstarters where the goal of the Kickstarter is to push as much random product at people by getting them to pledge ever higher tiers of money, to me is just, that's not what good games are. Good games are not 6,000 models, right? That's not what it's about. A $20, $30 perfectly constructed board game or card game that, because you funded it early on Kickstarter, they had the extra cash to make it nice, to do the research, to do the play testing that they needed, to get you a finished product that's nice and tidy and quality. I think that is the direction you should start seeing Kickstarter go, rather than, like, this is the way that I get $6,000 in models for $3,000.
Yeah.
That to me is just kind of overdone. I think it's done.
I feel like it's just extravagant, right? It's like, and I really feel like people are peeling back from that. Like,
you only have so much space, even.
And that's where, like, Kickstarting a board game that is, like, standard board game sized, you could do, if it's 30, 40, 50 bucks, like, the average player that really is into board games could do a lot of those. But, like, the $300, $400, $500 Kickstarters or $1,000 for 8 million models, there's only so much space for those.
It just goes back, it feels like very much the way that record labels kind of used to be and still are in the subgenres of music, where I will pre-order a record from a record label that I really love and trust 6 to 8 months in advance, not having heard the music at all. And I feel like the same thing should be happening on Kickstarter, where, like, if you have a reputation for going on Kickstarter and saying, you're going to get a game in a year, this is going to be the theme, we haven't developed the rules yet.
It's going to be awesome.
But because we've done this 6 times before, and every time your money gives us the time to really explore this game and, not have to worry about our day jobs or whatever, and nail this down and give you the best experience possible, I would love to see Kickstarter go in that direction.
I think there's space for someone to do that, or lots of companies
does
to do
it,
that.
by the way, with all of his Burning Wheel stuff and his Torchbearer stuff. Oh my gosh, it's great. It's like, here's my idea. 8 months later, here's the product. It's always great.
It's done.
We
did it.
Hey, let's talk about Christian, shall we?
All right.
On this note, because I think it's very relevant for the innovation side of the discussion. So Christian Peterson officially retired. You've read the thing. I haven't read the thing
You were
yet.
gone when it got posted.
Yeah.
So Christian he was the founder of Fantasy Flight Games, and he was the previous CEO of Asmodee North America, which is the company that FFG became a part of. But he posted a letter on the FFG website basically saying thanks to all the fans and all the customers over the years for giving him the chance to innovate on tabletop gaming and to do this for 20 or 25 years or however long he was here. And he, from everything I know, it seems like he was very much a driver of probably more innovation in the space than is credited to him in like a public manner. Because one of the big games earlier for Fantasy Flight Games was Twilight Imperium. Yeah. And it was one of the first like big board games, and not in the like 800 model Kickstarter realm, but in the like we're going to charge more than $20 at Target for a Clue kind of a game. And so I think it was like 80 or 90 bucks at the time, and people thought it was crazy, right? Yeah. That reminds me a lot of when the iPhone came out. It was $500, and I remember Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft at the time, was like, no one's ever going to pay $500 for a phone. Classic. That's ludicrous.
That's classic foot in mouth speaking.
Yeah,
right?
But
just never
again, it was like, if we offer a more in-depth, more thematic, bigger scale experience, people will dig that, right? And Twilight Imperium is kind of the game that launched them. And then, you kind of advance through the years, the non-collectible card games through the living card games.
Living card game form. I mean, that was a huge, it's not to be understated what kind of a gamble that was at the time. Especially when you have a game like, maybe not as much of a gamble as it would otherwise have been, because Game of Thrones, the CCG, from what I understand, was on the downturn and was going to be discontinued eventually.
And it kind of came out of that.
And so it's like, well, maybe we should try it. But also, just trying to make it an LCG is not like a no-risk attached bet. I mean, you've got to make all the new packaging, you've got to make the pitch, you've got to make all the new cards, you've got to make this kind of tweaked rules system. You've got to change everything, and that took tons of time and money and energy to do. So it wasn't just kind of like we'll give it a shot. It was like, are we willing to commit what could have been, and who knows, I don't know the numbers on it, but if it had just tanked entirely, maybe that could have been the downfall of FFG. Like, we don't know how tight those decisions ultimately were.
Well, and it reminds me a lot of, in the same way people were reacting to Keyforge recently, which is another, at least, project that came out under his tenure, right? Which is like, removing deck building, like, this is a crazy idea. Like, I can't, and every deck's unique, right? That kind of a thing, where like when LCGs came out in I think that was 2008 is roughly when the Thrones LCG came out.
That's so crazy.
It was that was a little over a decade now. It's like that was unheard of. Like, that was not now it's normal, right? Versus ended up doing the LCG or the non-collectible game.
And really just expandable board games and expandable card games just kind of started to make this expandable game family that's just like, we can do pretty constant expansions.
Yep.
Whether it's that locked room, what's the
Unlock?
That they do them pretty
or
common.
I think Time Stories is great too. Yeah. That's a cool thing. Anyway, so they announced earlier this year he was going to be leaving the company at the end of the year, going on to something else that we don't know yet. But he is just a super relevant part of, we work a lot in the expandable game space, and that led us to FFG at some point. And we have just seen it kind of firsthand over the years. And so it's a pretty big deal, him kind of leaving the company.
So I definitely think that it's fair to say that in my time just observing and being in this space, that FFG with Christian at the helm of FFG, especially, I don't know if it's especially pre-Asmodee, that's probably not a fair thing to say, because there was a lot of innovation happening after that too, was the most innovative, and maybe potentially still is the most innovative company in the space, often to their detriment, but also
because they keep focusing on the next big
right.
thing.
And this is what I get at. This is, if I were to, and I've had very limited interactions with Christian, right? A couple of conversations here and there. But I think that he is the kind of person that wants to push the boundaries out and forward, always. I think that's what interests him. I think that's what makes him excited to come to work. I think he's always excited to make those weird plays or make those weird bets. I'll bet if I were to play like a deck building game with him or a deck construction game with him, I don't think he'd be running the tier 1 super obvious deck, right? I think he'd be trying to do something weird and trying to discover something that nobody else has done.
I'm probably trying to surprise you.
Yeah, and trying to surprise you. And I feel like surprise is a big deal, because you look at Twilight Imperium LCGs, Destiny, the first really, I guess, the hybrid of card and dice. It wasn't enough just to have a Star Wars card game.
Sure.
You had to have this new idea.
If they're going to make a Star Wars collectible game, like, there's an easier way to do that.
Right. It's very easy. Booster packs.
Like,
Put them in.
I'll tell you, and this is what I was kind of hints at what I was saying earlier, where like the innovation in the game space is not where the magic is right now, because I'm thinking about Destiny, right? And it's like if you had come to me in 2014 and you'd said, "Hey, can you put together a plan for how we should do a a Star Wars collectible game?" It's like it writes itself.
Yeah.
It's like I know exactly what I'd do.
Yeah.
I could probably design that game in like 2 days.
I probably would have focused so hard. I think, and we're more inclined to focus on fundamentals, given the DNA of Covenant.
Sure.
Is like, let's make the best possible card game that we can. We wouldn't be looking at like, how can we spice it up? It's like, we don't need to spice it up.
Yeah.
It's Star Wars. This is a done deal. Like, let's make it great.
I'm telling you, it would have been, it seems obvious, right? And then you have this moment where like, I remember the first time I saw Destiny. I wrote that. I didn't want it to be my Destiny blog early on. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
It's like, these dice are big and colorful and they look childish.
It
and
doesn't
like, this
need
is a
this, yeah.
this is a simple game and it's complex. And like, what?
It's simple and it's complex.
It literally, like, in my head, it's like, this should have been 60 cards a deck, 4 copies of each card. You have a time, it's like, here's all the things this game needs to do. And so it's that, it's seeming that ability to step out and just not make decisions based on precedent, right? Which is both terrifying and also unique, and it's how you push things forward. And so, like when I'm looking and just thinking about, I'm really curious on 2 things. One, what's he going to go do, if anything? And 2, what does that mean for the future of Asmodee/FFG? Because like, that's what I want to see, right? How, like, is the DNA in the company now, or was it just a matter of him being around that he was pushing the envelope in this direction?
Yeah. Now, we also have apps and board games. I think XCOM and others started to do that, where we had what's the spooky game in the Arkham universe that went to the app as well?
Dunwich
Thank
Legacy?
you, Mansions of Madness. Yeah, thank you. From downtown, Mansions of Madness
That's
did that
right.
thing. Imperial
Yeah.
Assault started to get the app integration. So that was
X-Wing
also
now,
a new area that started to happen under Christian's watch.
I remember we did a couple interviews with him when we go to Worlds, and one of those first interviews, he was very keen on the idea of basically where games and technology meet, and how, like, he talked about that whole conversation about how that brings itself about. And so I think he definitely probably pushed them in that direction.
Also, I wouldn't be surprised if he just started a local store of some kind. He always seemed very interested in that puzzle as well. So, like, if I just heard that he was opening up a store in Minnesota, like, I would totally believe that.
Sure.
I would not be surprised. But long story short, what does this ultimately mean for current games at FFG and future games for FFG? Because, and the comparisons, are general. So, nobody needs to pick this apart. But I do feel like if we're looking for a reasonable parallel, Peterson was to the game space, or maybe even just FFG, and again, not quite as dramatic, but as Steve Jobs was to Apple or technology in general.
I think it's a good analogy because, like, obviously Steve Jobs is a unicorn in terms of like his impact on the universe, given that 99% of everyone that I ever see has a touchscreen phone in their pocket, or the whole thing. Like, I have huge reverence for.
But he felt like the push forward.
Yeah.
Everyone was looking at him to say, what are they doing next? But I feel like Christian was doing that.
What's interesting about that, though, because like Tim Cook, who is the obvious, like, not Steve Jobs, who's just the by the numbers, logistics, genius, slamming down, delivering iPhones on release, like eking out
across the world,
the supply chain, every fraction of an ounce of productivity he can eke out. And a lot of people talk about Apple in terms of losing their magic and what their ability to press forward, but in my mind, the interesting part of that, and I don't know who Tim Cook is in the analogy of tabletop games, but like the thing that I want FFG to do, and I want the industry to do, is what Tim Cook would do with the industry.
That's exactly, I'm glad you said that, because that's kind of where I was. Do we get now, with Christian leaving, do we get the Tim Cook style takeover that is now saying, hey, you know what, like, distribution is kind of broken. Like, we need to fix that. Like, local stores and the way that we handle supply chains, the way that we, import over from China, the way that we handle release dates, how we're late to releases so often, how we handle ourselves at conventions.
I mean, the small, not from big problem that is, what month is the next set of Destiny coming out? It's like, I don't know. Anyways,
are we gonna
because like Tim Cook would tell you when he announced the iPhone, he would say September 18th is when this is shipping.
Yep.
And it's like, it ships. Millions of units ship and arrive. Like, it's pretty amazing.
All across the universe.
But that's where, like, as much as I love innovation, as someone who has idolized Steve Jobs basically my entire life, I think the thing I would love to see way more of is the Tim Cook stuff. And I still think innovation is good, but, like, tone it back, right? Like, 1 or 2 new things this year, and then, like, everything else is just fundamentals and build community, and, like, from everything to organized play to release schedules to distribution to the whole thing.
To, like, cleaning up game lines, ultimately. Cutting things that maybe, are just kind of wasting people's time. At least from the, monetary level. Because, no organization can stop being dragged down by those things over time. I'm getting the sense that even just in the 2019 discussion, and now I think it's a good parallel with Christian leaving the industry now, how it looks and what happens 2019. I think we're both really hoping that this is a go under the hood and focus on the less exciting things, right? And I feel like it hasn't happened, and it doesn't happen in industries as much because it's more boring, but especially in tabletop, because I think it's fair to say the vast majority of people who get into this industry are not excited by supply chains as much as they are about their new game system.
Sure. Well, even just creating.
Yeah, right? There's a lot of creativity, a lot of creators get involved because they want to share this idea that they have concepts and their universe that they want you to explore. And so it makes sense that most people coming in that door don't then say, I'm going to pivot to, like,
let's make
logistics.
sure we release on the right day,
right?
Or whatever the case may be. But
it might be getting popular and successful enough that those people are now not only
getting
needed
involved,
but attracted.
Yeah,
right?
And I hope that is the case.
Yeah,
and I think that's what I would hope most out of this year, right? Which is essentially you just hunker down and, like, because again, what it seems, and it may be easier. And it seems flashier, right, to, like, put out 5 new big games this year and get a whole bunch of new people to play them. But then, like, I would much rather see them have the 3 or 4, I'm thinking Arkham and Destiny and what's going on with L5R and what's going on with Lord of the Rings. And it's like, you just go down the list and it's like, just make it great, right?
Just
make
streamline
these
it all.
Awesome and streamlined and fix those underlying issues so that you can, again, because it's like, or every year you're just going to have to keep putting out new great games everyone wants to try. And that takes way more energy in the long run.
It really does.
Keyforge, right? I mean, pick one. Like, just pick Keyforge and, like, go to town. Like, make sure this has everything it needs and is incredibly well done. Or put out 6 new games.
Yeah, your choice, right?
Okay, let's go back to it,
Let's, Zach, I feel like we should, so we wanted to get into the Covenant Master, which is coming up.
Oh, yeah. Got a little sidetracked
there. The cutoff for that, I believe, is January 24th. Don't quote me on that.
That seems correct.
That's right. For getting the participation prizes, I want to dive into that fully. I think maybe it's more appropriate to do that next cast. Let's just make it centered around Destiny, the casual approach that we're taking, and kind of, that to me is kind of, this is maybe a framing of 2019 industry-wide. Let's talk about 2019 for Covenant next cast.
Okay, I think that's pretty good. So one thing I would mention, though, on that is that, because the next cast will go up a week from Friday, is that next weekend is our regional for Star Wars Destiny.
Right on. Yeah.
We are starting to approach selling out, which I'm super excited about.
That's great.
I went to a regional in Dallas this past weekend. It was cool because Destiny's gone through a lot. 2018 was a rough year. And the Dallas regional had more players this year than last year, which is a sign of something.
Wow.
And I'm personally, I was getting concerned there for a minute. And we can talk about this more next week. But I was on the verge, like back before the last set came out, before Keyforge came out and what was going on. It was kind of just like almost losing its like appeal.
Yeah.
It was just like, well, I'm just not as interested in this anymore. And then complete 180, and now I'm back on the train.
Man, that's a good sign.
Yeah, I'm hopeful, and I'm seeing signs across the board in the discussions online, the communities, and the players, and people showing up, and everything that, like, again, I feel like the floor was hit, and when you're hitting the floor, it doesn't feel good. right?
Right.
And you're like, this okay, it could be it. But now it feels like it's actually bounced off the floor.
Yeah,
and like
great.
we're going
So
back
it's
up.
like a trampoline that like, you go down too far and now it's not, and now it's starting to bounce you back up.
Yeah,
And who knows,
absolutely.
to untold heights.
And that's my hope is, and I have no sign of believing this to be true other than the cards that keep coming out, minus the Palace, are great, is that on its way up, it doesn't get shot by something or some...
Just taking the legs out from under
Yeah,
it,
and there's a lot of things, right? Like if we have another 80, 90-day period where Fantasy Flight Games says nothing about Destiny, if they don't, there's people complaining, but like there's just a lot of communication things.
Fundamentals is what we're talking about.
It's what we're talking about.
Let's make it about the fundamentals.
Yeah, but I hope
on
that those
banner.
things at least get mildly fixed, if not completely fixed. So crossing my fingers, enjoying Destiny while I can, and I think we can dive more into Destiny next week. But our regional's next weekend. That is the 19th, I believe. So if you're thinking about coming to that, I highly recommend signing up. It's going to be a great time. We're probably going to be hitting breakfast before, dinner after, like we usually do. So if you're coming to Tulsa, come looking to have a good time, and I think it'll be fun.
And a quick little addendum for all the Arkham players and fans out there: Return to Domwich Legacy has shipped.
It's out there.
That's an exciting thing. And
Those
if you're
boxes look great.
If you're a supplement subscriber for our Arkham Horror supplement subscription, then of course yours was shipped out, and I hope you're all enjoying that very much. I haven't had a chance to look at it whatsoever, except I think I played one with Matt on camera last recording that we did.
Yeah, you did.
So it's amazing the cycle, how long it takes to get out.
That was a while back.
Yeah.
But I was just walking by as they were packing it up and shipping it and stuff, and like I saw the box, and like it looks really good. It's like a dark green with like the star, like kind of stars. Anyways.
Excellent stuff.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to some questions. Zach, what do you think? These people use the hashtag AskCovenant on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or maybe Instagram. Nobody really talks on Instagram, though. We just look at pictures, don't we? Isn't that what that's about? I mean, there's some comments, but I don't know. Do you guys ask?
Well, I will say, if someone used the hashtag AskCovenant on Instagram and there was a good photo, absolutely would get pulled up on the cast,
that's
right?
true.
So,
100%.
hey, in fact, I challenge someone to do that. Post a great photo with the question. The photo will show up on the podcast, and we would love to answer your question right here on the show.
Let's kick it off here with Landon Dastrup, a continuous contributor, I would say, to this podcast and beyond. So thank you very much, Landon. Always great to hear from you. Since Keyforge's decks are built randomly, is there such a thing as an optimized Keyforge deck? And therefore, is there such a thing as an unoptimized Keyforge deck? I don't know the algorithm used to make decks, but from my understanding of the game, since you can't build them, there could be no such thing as something that's optimized. Maybe certain cards have synergy together, but a truly optimized deck seems impossible. Well, okay, so I think this kind of strikes at the heart of understanding the difference in a game like Keyforge from a traditional building game, where you come into the game and you say, my purpose here, well, for many of us, is to optimize, make this deck because I have full control over what's in it, as good as it possibly can be, as streamlined as it possibly can be, to execute on the idea that I set out to achieve. And if that idea happens to be the best idea in the metagame, I will win all the prizes and congratulations. Obviously, Keyforge does not fit in that box, and so it's a good question to ask. Can I even have an optimized? Should I even have that dialogue with myself about an optimized or unoptimized deck? And so I think that's a good thing to question and to start with. And the answer is really, well, as much of a cop-out as yes and no.
Maybe.
Because you cannot fully control what's in your deck, obviously you can't have anything that's perfectly optimized if the conditions for something being optimized are, it's absolutely perfect if I had full control over the number of cards and the cards in the deck. Because you can't do that. But, enough monkeys, enough typewriters, right? This is a classic philosophical exploration, right? Technically, if an algorithm is entirely random, which this one isn't, but random inside the bounds of what the best possible thing could be, it could randomly hit that best possible thing. There could randomly be a deck that has 4 of everything that you want, and it all works synergistically and perfectly together. Now, obviously, one of the interesting things about Keyforge is like the chance of, given the number of possibilities of decks from this algorithm, if a human being could go in there and spend many years, researching and finding this combination of cards within the bounds of this algorithm is undoubtedly the most optimal thing to play, is that algorithm ever going to hit that deck? And if it does, is that deck, sitting in somebody's desk in, Alberta,
Has to be sitting
Canada,
somewhere, right?
Or is it out being played in a metagame somewhere?
Shout out to Alberta,
So,
man.
yeah. Holler, Alberta crew.
I think he mentions the right word here, which is synergy. I think there are decks with more synergy and decks with less synergy. But even optimized, I mean, the weird part is that, like, once you remove choice, and what you're playing against is random, then, like, what's good is not as good. Where it's like, if, that's the thing of a metagame, and if we talked about Destiny, I would have really gotten into this, where it's like, what happens in a meta is that a deck gets established as the best. So people start changing the rest of their decks to beat that.
Yeah.
And then the thing that beats that becomes the best, and so on and so forth.
At a certain point, what's optimal is what's winning against the other optimal
Yeah,
things.
and there are some like generically good cards in Keyforge, like Bait and Switch as an example. Is like if they ever gonna have Amber, you can steal it from them. That's good. But I'm thinking about like Grasping Vines that bounces artifacts, or like the guy that I forget his name that can use your opponent's artifacts. And it's like those aren't good against people that don't have artifacts, and they're incredible against people that do. And so like, what is the best and like what is optimized? I don't know, but there are synergies, right? There are decks that I have one that's got a sacrifice a human to do a thing. It's got one human in it. Yeah. It's like, well, that's probably not optimized.
I got that one that Untamed where it's like if you've used 3 creatures this turn, like you get like 3 amber or something, and I have exactly 3 untamed creatures in the entire deck.
Yeah, so the stars have to align,
I'd have to put them all in play. They'd have to stay there.
But I think that's the fun part of Keyforge, though. It's like, you know what your deck does, right? And like, when your deck hits that, you're going to feel like $1 million.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even, the rest of it doesn't even matter to me. That's the crazy part.
It truly is discovery. Yeah. So I would say in the strictest, well, in the terms that I think we're actually talking about, there is not an optimized deck in Keyforge. But certainly within the conditions of the algorithm, there's going to be something that, if put out in an infinite number of experiments and an infinite number of players, would be the best deck over time. Well, whether or not we could ever recognize it as being such
is really impossible to tell. Because, hypothetically, there probably is a best deck. Mm-hmm. If you paired it against every deck in the game 10 times, it would win more than any other deck. But finding that out is impossible. So that's the coolest part. Yeah. It's like you immediately introduce mystery, and it's like, well, you can't know the best, so just go.
Could be the one you have right now. Could be it. Could be the best possible thing.
All right, next question from Nathan Souter. Did we determine that's how we say it?
Got 2 from Nathan.
Another Ask Covenant. All these giveaways, but where are the Arkham Horror LCG
what a
giveaways?
Good question.
Yeah, so we, even this week on stream, something we've been doing a lot with Keyforge, we're giving stuff away. This week we have some prototype Amber that we're sending out to a random Keyforge Display subscriber at some point in the next week. And with Arkham, I mean, I'm looking right now at some pretty cool stuff.
They're really good. I like those prototypes. So we have some Mythos board prototypes before we were testing color, and so they're like a stone gray, and we started looking at that.
They look like stone.
They look really good. So I was gonna say there are 2 reasons that the giveaway started, really, for us. Like I wish it had been a more like
intentional.
I almost said Machiavellian, but like, yeah, intentional is a good way to do it. Not all intention has to be Machiavellian intention. Which is like, hey, giveaways, this is something we want to do. It was more like, we have all of these prototypes, and we're tired of just like them sitting on desks, and because you don't want to throw them away or get rid of them because they have value and they're cool, but you also don't know what to do with them, so it's like, let's just get them out of here, let's give them away. So we started doing that, and that was a very successful thing, and that was cool.
Well, we also had we were doing Keyforge streams with the Keyforge decks.
And we had promotional decks that we could give away.
Yeah, and it was like, well, there's a lot of people that would love to play this game, and next week we're just going to pick 2 new decks and play those. So instead of us just sitting on a bunch of decks, why don't we actually just like give them to people?
Get them out. And here's the other thing, is that collectible games, or at least, and especially a game like Keyforge, has product that is universally valuable regardless of who the player is.
Yep.
No matter how much Keyforge we all play, a new Keyforge deck, valuable.
Yeah.
But that next Mythos pack that you already have, no value. So giving away actual product for LCGs is much harder, and that actually goes into like kind of the tournament
a very
and
deep problem
organized
for
play
LCGs.
discussion too, which is like, what do you give away? But you caught us, Nathan. You're right. We do have some prototypes for Arkham, so let's give them away.
Well, and one thing we've talked about doing, total speculation, I don't know if we'll do it or not, is actually streaming Arkham. We've been doing the streams on Mondays.
We did one for the podcast, Jonathan and I.
Did you stream it? You probably just recorded it,
Yeah,
right?
we just recorded it. But
so we have talked about streaming some Arkham, and that's where the giveaways have typically happened. But stay tuned. We we'll have some stuff. We love Arkham. That's the
Arkham
thing.
also hard to stream because you don't want to spoil the adventure for people who haven't played it yet.
But like, we could go back and start at the beginning.
Yeah.
People would probably enjoy that. So we'll see.
Question 3 from Nathan as well. I think Nathan left like 2 or 3 questions. A final Last Covenant. What's a game you were super stoked for that just totally fell flat when played? And in contrast, what's a game that had no hype or fanfare that took you by surprise and you loved? I wish I had a little more time to think about this.
So I will answer the first thing so you're thinking, and then when you're answering, I'll think.
I feel like I know the first thing.
There's a game that had not nearly as much hype or fanfare that I didn't think I would like at all that I ended up loving, which is Warhammer Champions. That was a game I had heard about, and it was like, okay, this is fine.
Couldn't have cared less about it.
Really didn't care. Not a big Warhammer person in general, and I didn't need another collectible game in my life, so it's just kind of like, all right, cool. And then you demoed it, learned it, and then you came to me. We played it in the hotel, and I played it, and I was like, this is great. This is different. It's great. Right? So that's definitely my second answer, which is a game that didn't really have hype that I loved.
We'll just split the goalposts on this one. I'll give you the first one. For me, the most recent example of this is actually Android Mainframe. That one where you're placing those little
tracks, yeah.
It had potential to actually be, I mean, every game has potential to be great. And it wasn't. It just wasn't at all. And it felt like, I remember when I was playing, there were little things that if they had been done slightly differently, it would have opened up that space way more. But it's like, it doesn't work like that. It is as boring as I thought it was. Like those kinds of moments.
Yeah. Well, it's like you went to the trouble of making this game and doing it, and then you just kind of like the last 10% didn't make it that interesting.
It just wasn't good. Yeah. It wasn't that good.
I feel pretty good about that answer.
I wanted that to be good.
Well, that's one of those things where it's like I would love. See, that is something I would love to see someone do, which is having a universe like Android, and then put a lot of different games in it, so that it's like you don't play an LCG. But you play this universe, right? It's kind of like they're doing with the Arkham Horror universe. I think they're doing a good job of that. But I would love to see triple down on that.
Right. We've already got the LCGs copyrighted, the unique deck games copyrighted. Yeah. Just throw these systems, like I said, more game systems. Maybe we don't need.
I mean, if you already kind of have it with X-Wing, and not X-Wing, Star Wars. It's like you have a ship game, you have an Armada game, you have a skirmish game, you have an RPG on a board, you have an RPG for real. You have a collectible game, you have an LCG, but like I would love to see it in like a picture like a board games, like a series of board games in the same universe.
Absolutely. I got an answer for the second one too, so I'm gonna outdo you on the answer. It's Arena Rex. I mean, imagine a game
no fanfare
whatsoever, just all, like kind of randomly like, oh, we'll print these rules and give this one a go, just see what gladiators are up to, and it was like this may be the best game ever. Miniatures.
It's a great game. I mean, it's hitting all the beats for you, I think.
Oh, it's so good.
So I will say on the first one, and it's not fell flat in that I don't think it was great. It's just that I was way more excited going in than I ended up being, which is Armada, Star Wars Armada.
Oh, right on, yeah.
Which I enjoyed. I played like once a week. I used to work the store on Sundays, and I had a friend, Matt, who'd come up, and we'd play once a week. And it is a very lean back game, but like the thing that always still bothers me is that it's in the rules that after turn 6, the game's over because it doesn't expect the game to finish.
Right. That's weird.
And that's like an hour and a half in. And so like, again, my point was just to hang out with a friend and play a game, which was fun. So they'd always did that. But like, that was one of those games where like, I feel like if they had found a way to make it finish within an hour and actually finish, that it could have been a significantly more popular game than it ended up being because of the form factor.
All right. Fair enough. These are good.
Yeah, good questions.
Let's go to Nicholas Klusner. Looks like a Facebook question to me. Hey, fellas. Hey, Nicholas. I've been following you guys. Well, hello there. I've been following you guys for years, since 2011. That is a number of years. So what is that? Is that 8 years now? 7?
Roughly 8 years. This year it makes it 8.
Okay. So that's a long time. We were into some weird stuff back then. That's kind of a weird thing to say. The gaming market has expanded.
Weird games. Small games.
Expanded and changed quite a bit since then. With all the games you guys cover, it can be sometimes hard to decide which game to pick. And we cover a small amount. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Can you imagine?
All the games we cover.
All the games. It's like a very tiny amount compared to most. Can you give some insight on how to pick a game that you guys feature? Well, yeah. I'll give you some insight. I think there's like, we could probably develop a series of questions that would get somebody, those little flow charts that get somebody to the game?
Absolutely.
Do you want...
That's probably next, now that we actually have a learning series for each game, is like, all right, well, how do you pick which game to learn? Anyways, go ahead.
Do you want to play cooperatively? or competitively, and if not cooperatively, why not? Because it's great. But if you have a couple of friends discussing, do we want to play a cooperative game? That certainly narrows you down, or a competitive game. I think past that, do you like Star Wars or not?
A good question.
I mean, that's going to cut off half of the catalog really right off the bat. If you're really into Star Wars, there's probably a Star Wars game that you will love of the many that are there.
Absolutely.
If you don't like Star Wars, then your competitive games are pretty nice. I mean, you have L5R, which is kind of the samurai thing. You have Game of Thrones, of course. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, you should probably play Game of Thrones. You also have there's one I'm missing. Oh, it's Netrunner. Bummer.
And Lord of the Rings.
Well, that's cooperative, though. I was thinking of the competitive ones that aren't Star Wars. Like, the thing is, I wish so much that Netrunner was still around. Like,
yeah, I mean, we all do.
Officially, so much still to this
It
day.
hurts. It hurts
2019
my soul.
is coming back. It's killing me.
Maybe that's what we'll see in 2019.
Oh, man. We need to see something.
Bring
with
on
that.
the net runs. So I think part of this, too, is like we have a learning series for all these games. Mm-hmm. And so I would start by watching the What Is This Game?
That's what the What Is videos are
for any of the games that the theme appeals to you. Because we will literally cover in 5 to 10 minutes what the game is and why someone might enjoy it. And then beyond that, it's like whichever ones pique your interest, go to the next one, which is watch us actually play. Because all the games that we're supporting are usually fun. They're going to expand. So if you get into it, you can get really into it. There's usually communities for these games. So like they're all striking those chords. But the actual execution of the game itself is different. So like, I think they're all fun, and you can have a lot of fun with all of them and what you're looking for. But it's also like, if you're looking for tournaments, there's some games on the list I don't recommend. Like, you're not going to be an Arkham player.
Right.
But if you're not looking for tournaments, there's games I'm not going to recommend either. But even then, the tournament games usually have super casual communities that you can get into.
That learning page on the new site is going to be super helpful for that. And then I was thinking Champions and Transformers are two other.
That's what I'm saying. If you're super into Transformers, it's like this is obvious.
It's kind of theme-based at this point, isn't it? I mean, if you like any of those things, and if you don't care about any of them, then it's just about mechanics. And so you just got to kind of look at probably how each of those games plays.
Yeah.
But we can do a better job of this just as a brand and as a, kind of the next step past the learning content that we kind of doubled down on last year is now giving people the tools to navigate where they should kind of focus their attention.
Yeah, because it's one thing to learn a game, but there's obviously the period before you want to learn a game.
It can be overwhelming, yeah.
Where you have to figure out how to get them. But I think step one is theme. Obviously, if you like Star Wars, a million recommendations. Start there. But theme, look at the themes. Watch the What Is videos. They're going to take you 5 minutes. And then past that, I think you'll kind of intuitively know where you're going to go. And maybe, the next couple of months we'll have something that makes that easier to answer.
Thank you, Nicholas. That's great to hear from you. And then finally, question 5, Goram Nerd. Is that a Firefly reference? Probably. Ask Kevin, hey guys, love the cast. Great, thank you. So I totally understand that it's a crazy time release-wise with so many new games and recently released or soon to be released. As a fan who discovered your channel because of your X-Wing content, it's hard to not be slightly concerned when the content train has come to a crawl. With that, it has. I would say it's come to a stop. We haven't done anything for X-Wing in a hot minute.
It's been a while.
Since the learning stuff for 2nd edition. We haven't done anything. The fact that the X-Wing compatible tokens and templates are nowhere in sight, also true. While products for Arkham and Destiny have been announced and released. Not trying to throw shade, love you guys. So is this simply TC focusing on the new games that are arriving first, or has something happened with you guys where we should expect little or no X-Men content or aftermarket product for sale in the future? Very good question. It's a great question.
I have a lot to say here.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is structurally the timing of when X-Wing came out. It essentially hit in September, which was a month after Gen Con. And at Gen Con, we got a lot of new games. And so one of our big focuses as an organization, right, is the learning series we've already mentioned earlier in the show. But essentially, that kind of just took over, right? So we created a lot of content, a lot of learning series for those new games that were coming out. And for us, last year, there was a lot of stuff happening organizationally for us in the middle of the year. And then beyond that, X-Wing is also a big project. So like we put out a board for Destiny as an example, which is one product. But when we started looking at doing X-Wing compatible products, right, it's like in the past we'd done faction-themed templates and tokens and bombs and munitions. And it's something that I very much would still love for us to do, and I would love to see as
It's on the potential list.
as a player of the game. Yeah,
sitting there.
Literally, it's on the list. But it is just a big undertaking, and there was a lot of stuff that we had working, even the new website you mentioned, which was a huge design project on our end. And so it kind of just fell prey to bad timing and bandwidth issues and what's going on. And in a perfect world, we would have done a huge product line for that 6-9 months ago. But that was definitely, I think, a conscious choice of us not to do because it was such an effort and we had to make some very tough choices. So hopefully we get to that, but obviously no promises. And then in terms of content, kind of the same thing. I won't be surprised if you see other content from us in the future, but it's kind of like we start with learning series, and we did a learning series for X-Wing last year. It was a big project. But if we have a bunch of games that don't have that, we're going to typically default to doing that first. And then now the nice part is that those are all done.
That's true, which is nice. It's wide open, like you said. And the other thing, too, is like games like X-Wing and miniatures games in general, so we have a limited amount of space. So when we're streaming on like Monday nights, it's harder to stream a game of X-Wing.
Yeah.
Your cameras have to be farther away. They have to be in different angles. The lighting is different. You need to cover a lot more space. It all has to be in focus. So a lot of it is just like, it's funny how so many decisions fall prey to circumstances and just kind of random things that when put together, it's like, yeah, you know, I understand why it would look like you don't care about X game or Y game or Z game anymore. And a lot of times that just comes down to weird technical things that it's just harder to live stream an X-Wing game.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's also like because of X-Wing usually takes an hour and a half, maybe an hour 45 minutes. And so like we ran into this problem when we used to do a lot more like tournament reports when we do games from big events, is that like if 20 minutes in, the game kind of turns a certain direction, it can be very uninteresting very quickly.
yes.
And X-Wing is a very watchable game. Some of the best videos I think that we've posted are X-Wing games that are just very enjoyable to watch because the game is good to watch.
Probably some of the best games we've ever done.
But
maybe the best.
When we were doing those, we were cutting out 45 minutes of downtime out of a 90-minute game. And so like you can't do that live. And so again, there's just a lot of things. And I will say it is something that is a conversation we have, and it's not something we're just ignoring or we don't care about as much as there's just real challenges that we're dealing with. So in a perfect world, we would love to do way more of it. But unfortunately, that's not the universe we live in. We're trying to build that universe. So we'll see. I think that's kind of where we're at.
Not to say it's not insurmountable, and there's certainly a desire to surmount.
And I mean, I think the other part of that, right? We had a big shift early on 2-3 years ago with X-Wing. It's one of those, any game that's been around for a while has seen us operating in a different way that we're not doing anymore, which is like we used to go to Worlds and Gen Con.
A million unboxings.
We unboxed every product that came out. We covered every major tournament, and we posted the top games. And that's just not what we do right now. So like games that are new aren't asking this question at all. And so like there's just a lot of things happening.
Also, turns out that wasn't very sustainable.
No, it's way too much. And what I was getting to there as well, you brought back the point, which is cool. There's also a ton of people that do that now.
Yeah,
so like
that's true.
Most X-Wing big events get streamed. There's tons of people creating content that are great in the community. And so we're actively trying to ask the question, where can we have the most value and impact on the industry? And a lot of the stuff we used to do is just not where it's at. So
we'll keep moving too. That's a fun thing. Running a business like this is super stressful and exciting. I think it's a very addicting thing, right? It's like the ultimate game.
It is the ultimate game.
Where should we go? What should we do?
So hey, we usually ask a question at the end of the show, and you guys are awesome enough to answer in the comments on YouTube typically.
Today is no different.
Today is no different. The question I want to ask, last cast before the end of last year, we asked about favorite moment of 2018. This year, this episode, we're talking a lot about 2019, the future of the industry. So I would be curious, what do you really want to see happen in 2019?
Good question.
Could be the game with a theme that you love that's never been touched. It could be some fundamental shift in the industry in terms of how things are handled. But if you had one wish that you could just will upon the industry.
Tabletop gaming in 2019.
What is that thing in 2019?
Thank you guys so much for listening and watching, for all of you that I'm staring at right now. And until next time, keep playing.